Hi, I'm Molly from horticulture.co.uk, and today I'm joined with Rob Jones, the creator of the Garden Design Company. Rob, do you want to explain a little bit about who you are and what you do?
Well, thanks, Molly, for inviting me. So my background is a bit odd, really, because I used to be a lawyer. But about 30 years ago, I left the law to pick up a pair of secretaires and then established what's called the Garden Design Company Ltd. And so we're a specialist design and build company. Tend to based in the southeast in the Thames Valley in London. But we go further afield and have worked up in Norfolk, and we're currently working down New Forest. So we spread far and wide.
How did your love for gardening begin, and how has it evolved over all the years?
In the late 1980s, I was a lawyer, and I was specializing in medical crime. But as a sideline, I was making up hanging baskets for sale. And I would drive up in my Golf GTI to New Covent Garden and load my car up with busy lizzies and geraniums, and then park in an underground car park. And in Old Covent Garden, where my office was, I then changed into a suit and did a day's work as a lawyer before driving home and then making up the hanging basket. So I sold those through a number of small little garden centres and nurseries, and one of them then came up for sale in about 1990. But the figures didn't really add up. And so I thought my time would be better served if I actually went away to college and actually learned something about horticulture and garden design. So I decided to take a year out and went to Pershore as a mature student and never really looked back.
From that, what was the pivotal moment that drove you to change your career and pursue garden design?
In those days, there was no such thing as the internet, and faxes has only just come in. So I was commuting to London and then covering the rest of the country for the Doctors Defence Organisation. So invariably, I would be commuting to London in the dark and then returning in the dark. And it suddenly dawned on me on one of those horrible commuting days that I really didn't want to do that for another 40 years, but I just loved my garden a bit. And I just thought there must be something else to it. And I thought the advantage of having qualified as a lawyer is that you could always go back to it. It's probably a bit late now. Certainly at the time, I thought I could go and dabble in garden design and horticulture. And if it worked, brilliant.
Can you tell us a little bit about setting up the Garden Design Company and what kind of work you do there?
I was a little bit naive, as you always are when you're at college. I was thinking when I left Pershore, I'd become a freelance garden designer and make a fortune. But actually, whilst at college, I noticed there was an advert for a garden centre in Marlow for someone to set up a brand new design and build company for them. Well, they gave me the job. And so I created a new garden design and build company for them. But of course, when you leave college, you think you know everything. In fact, you know very little. But after 4 years, the garden centre were very patient with me. And then they invited me to actually have it as my own little company within the garden centre. And of course, by that time, I frankly knew how big a skip was. And so I had learnt a lot very quickly in those 4 years. And really, on the 1st of May 1996, that's what it was, we established the Garden Design Company Limited. And then we wanted to offer a design and build service so that rather than people traditionally having to go to a garden designer and then having to then source a contractor to build the garden, we wanted like a one-stop shop. And indeed, we as a company, we never ever use the L word, the landscaping word, for we design and create gardens and indeed also create relationships such that we rarely advertise, but instead just work on repeat business and recommendation from private clients, and invariably trying to avoid developers and commercial clients who normally just have one agenda, whereas we much prefer working for good quality private clients, love their gardens and come to love us as well.
How would you describe your garden design philosophy in just 3 words?
That's quite challenging, but I thought long and hard about that. And it's really three simple words: it's natural and sustainable.
Could you tell us a little bit about one of the most challenging projects you've ever worked on and how you kind of overcame the challenges that came with it?
This year was the first time we've ever entered the Barley Awards, and we won in both of the categories we entered. what's called the National Landscaping Awards. Um, and they're really looking for challenging projects. And so the first one was in Wimbledon, and all the materials, the plants, the trees, the soil, the diggers and the dumpers all had to go through the client's study. And effectively what we did was we built a tunnel of timber on the floor, on the walls and on the ceiling through this client's study, so that he barely knew we were there. We did this fantastic transformation of a very ordinary garden in Wimbledon. And that caught the eye of the judges for barley. And as I say, we won an award for that. But the other one was almost equally dramatic, where access wasn't a problem, but it was up in the Chilterns, and it involved the creation of a 250 square meters of wildlife pond with 84 tons of glacial boulders being incorporated into the water feature. And really, the challenge there was it was a very, very complicated build, but we went to enormous extent to create some exquisite planning and detailing, and very much a can-do attitude, resulted in both projects delighting both us and the judges, and actually, most importantly, the clients as well.
How do you integrate sustainability into your designs, and why is that so essential today?
I suppose I've been talking about the mantra of sustainability long before it became the buzzword. And indeed, it was about 20 years ago, I was really privileged enough to meet Beth Chatto, and she gave me a private tour around her garden. And her mantra of right plant, right place is just so important and still is. Because why would you suggest a plant or a tree which will not thrive in the given location? On the issue of sustainability as well, often clients might want an instant result. And so the temptation is to supply and plant large instant specimens. But often, the smaller plants and the smaller trees and smaller hedgerows, the whips, for example, do much better than larger, more instant trees, which invariably need much more TLC than smaller stock. But then in turn, respect the soil structure, try and avoid working on it when it's as saturated as it is at the moment, and plan when to plant, and don't be afraid to perhaps delay planting. So we're due to be planting some trees next week, but the ground is absolutely saturated, and we turned around to the client and said, let's just be patient. It's right at the beginning of the tree planting season. Let's hold back from doing that until, the ground dries out a little bit. Sustainability is really important, but it's also about just making sure you have a low impact, and the material that you use, is chosen well and planted well.
It's getting a bit colder now, it's getting to that darker time of year. How do you go about designing gardens that remain captivating across the different seasons?
When it comes to plants, if I'm doing a planting plan, you've obviously got the structure you're going to be creating, which is as much the hard landscaping, the trees and the hedgerows. But the next thing is when you're actually choosing the plants, what's going to work. I actually start by designing what's going to look good in the winter. So you can have hellebores, you can have aconites, and the snowdrops, and sarcococca, some of the evergreens as well. And that's your starting point, because if a garden looks good in the winter with things like coloured stems from dogwoods and Salix pratensis, then the rest of the garden can probably hang together. But July and August is often a bit of a challenging time for getting plants to flower, in the sense of May and June, you've got the Chelsea look, that's all looking great. But July and August can be a difficult time as well. So things like Echinacea then, and Verbena bonarensis, the Cosmos and Dahlias of this world, they're all really good doers for those what often could be hot months in July and August. Spring and autumn will then tend to look after itself, because if you can't design a planting scheme to look good in May and June, then, well, you're struggling. So start by designing in the winter. So things like mahonias, sarcococcas, Christmas box, they still stand in my mind as being, good go-to plant for winter interest.
Can you share some common mistakes that maybe people who are new to gardening make, and how they can avoid them?
There's an analogy here. It's a little bit like decorating. If you decorate your wall or put some new wallpaper up, but your plaster is fundamentally flawed or it's blown and it's all cracked, then it doesn't matter what you put on the wall. You've always got those imperfections that are always going to come through in some shape or form. So soil preparation is absolutely key. And so you really need to improve the soil quite considerably, with the addition of lots and lots of organic matter. So if you've got a very sandy free draining soil, the organic matter will help to bind it together. If you've got a heavy clay soil, then the organic matter with, say, clay breaker and some grit dug in the autumn and then letting the winter weather get to it, break up that soil. So it's then really, really ready to plant in the spring is absolutely key. If you've got a new garden and some new beds you're just creating, don't plant straight into them, but think about the soil preparation and adding lots of organic matter and possibly studying some of the works of Charles Dowding as well and his no-dig philosophy is a really good way to go. Certainly consider, but don't rush into planting in April when the garden centres proverbially open. But instead plan ahead and start that bed preparation in the autumn and early winter, and it will pay dividends when you come to plant next spring.
Can you share some gardening tasks or tips that are specific to the upcoming winter season?
Well, I am a follower of Charles Dowding and no dig, and I've got some of the beds outside of my vegetable garden that really need augmenting with some well-rotted compost. Um, I'm trying to get my compost up to the right temperature of like 54 degrees so it kills off the dormant weed seeds. And I'm probably failing in that regard. So I think I'm going to be getting some well-rotted horse manure from some stables nearby and then dressing the beds and then hopefully re-establishing a new asparagus bed because my asparagus has not been performing particularly well in the last couple of years. And I think it's time for some new crowns.
How have garden design trends changed over the year, and where do you kind of see them heading in the future?
Nowadays, with people really embracing the idea of kitchen gardens, of growing your own, whether it's fruit, vegetables, or cut flowers, is something that everyone's embracing. Um, Families like it, children love it, older people have got the time to do it. Um, and it really is quite shocking when you talk to people about the air miles, food miles that, particularly cut flowers involved, because most cut flowers are grown in Africa or in Colombia and they're flown over at vast expense to the environment. And if we can just stop buying flowers from abroad, or at least reduce the number of flowers that we buy from abroad as cut flowers, because let's face it, they last, what, a week, 10 days? Um, and buy more seasonally, locally grown flowers, or indeed, as I say, grow them yourself. This month, it's 1st November today, and many people start sowing their sweet peas in November. I personally think it's a little early. I tend to sow them in January, February. But cut flowers are just so beautiful.
You're quite experienced now, you're well established. Is there one piece of advice that you wish you'd received when you first started out in garden design?
Often I look back in time, and I've been doing this for 30 years now. And so I'm probably doing something right. But I do think that I should have gone to work for somebody else. I really should have gone to work for, a big, well-established company like Mark Gregory of Landfall. Because who knows, I'm probably been doing it all wrong. I just don't know. And I effectively set up my own with the garden centre. But so much of it was self-taught. And so I'm hoping I'm doing it right. But yeah, I often think, perhaps I should have gone to work for someone else to start with and then seen how they did it.
So, are there any future projects or goals that you've set for yourself in your garden in the near future?
There's two things really. I'm on the board of a wonderful charity called Green Fingers, and we raise money to design and build gardens in children's hospices so that children with life-limiting illnesses can benefit from being outside, feeling the sun on their face and wind in their hair, and hearing the bird song and making those special moments outside rather than being cooped up in a wall. Um, so Green Fingers is celebrating its 25th anniversary next year. And we've got a couple of big gardens that are being built at the moment for Green Fingers. One at the Nook and near Norwich, and one at Demelza in Kent. I'm really looking forward to opening those next season as part of our 25th anniversary celebrations, because it's just lovely to give other people who are less fortunate than you the opportunity to just enjoy the outdoor room. And they're two big outdoor projects that are really exciting. And the Nook is involving 1,500 square meters of wildflower meadow. And it's being sown this month. And I provided a little bit of guidance on it. But of course, there's always a bit of a gamble when you sow a wildflower meadow. You're never quite sure what's going to emerge, when it's going to emerge, how successful it's going to be. So there's a bit of pressure on that. But I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing a really amazing result next year.
Is there anywhere that our viewers can reach you if they want to see more of your work and what you do?
We got an amazing Instagram account. And if you search for, I think it's Garden Design Co. Ltd. or the Garden Design Company, we've got a lovely Instagram page. I'm a bit obsessed by Instagram, so we post most days. And there's lots of stories about my bees and my wildflower meadows, and a few features about my Labradors as well. So you can follow us on that. And then our website is gardendesignco.co.uk. And there's lots of stories and portfolios there. And there's guides you can download for free on how to create wildflower meadows. So there's lots of information there. And my numbers are on the website as well. So if you ever get stuck, just look on the website, you find my phone number, and my ear is always open.
That's great. Thank you, Rob.